Hi, and this is just some guy talking about Doctor Who because I'm bored. So today I'm talking about Attack of the Cybermen, a 1985 story with Colin Baker as a Doctor. It was written by, well, that's actually quite complicated. You see, the story was presumably by Leven, who was the show's continuity advisor at the time, and of course he also wrote Doctor in Distress. He claims that he came up with the story of it when it was actually written by Eric Saward. I don't know. It was written by Eric Saward and Saward, and you can clearly see that because a lot of people get killed. Well, everyone dies except for the Doctor and Perry. It has a lot of unnecessary violence. All of the supporting characters are morally in the grey, basically, and it's a real Saward script, and it does harken back a lot to Resurrection of the Daleks. But Ian Levine claims that he came up with the story, and a lot more than he's given credit for. So you'd think it would be simple, written by Eric Saward and story by Ian Levine, and that would make sense. But of course, only one of them got the writing credit for the story. So which one was it? Well, it was Paula Moore. Yeah, but basically, back in those days, there was union and copyright things different from nowadays, I presume, which meant that the script editor of the show then couldn't also the writer couldn't also be the script editor. So that's why Earthshock and other Saward scripts were edited by Anthony Root, I think it was, but he couldn't be his own script editor on this story. So in order to be the script editor, he had to give the writing credit to this random person called Paula Moore, who claimed to have put a little bit of input into the story for reasons, but has since said that she actually had nothing to do with the writing of it. So that means that we have a story which was conceived by one person, written by another, and credited to another. So, yeah. A bit of a complication on that side. The story itself is actually quite underappreciated. It's quite dark, as it's a Saward script, but the concept is actually quite good, and so you have to give some credit to Ian Levine for that. But it's more in the execution that's got this story not to the same level as, say, Revelation of the Daleks later that series has, or Vengeance on Varus. Episode 1 is very atmospheric. It builds up the Cybermen. I mean, you already know they're going to be in it because it's literally called Attack of the Cybermen, but it isn't until halfway through. And you can tell that was originally going to be like the cliffhanger of the episode. They probably changed it to Attack of the Cybermen when they knew that there wasn't going to be a cliffhanger there and just wanted to get the viewership up. Because, I mean, look at what happened with Earthshock. I mean, oh God. But the acting in episode 1 is quite poor. Not even like a few performances were bad, a few performances were good. Every performance in episode 1, just watching you think there's something wrong here. And that isn't the case in episode 2. Everyone in episode 1 gives a bad performance. In episode 2, you've got decent performances pretty much all around. I mean, Colin Baker is still sort of in that post-twin dilemma arrogance-ness, but he's sort of coming away from that a bit. Nicola Bryant seems to be giving quite a shy performance, and the chemistry between her and Colin is just not there. All of the the builders that are helping, they're all quite bumbly. The Cybermen seem to be making this voice to try and make themselves sound more like robots, which just happens in episode 1, but not so much in episode 2. And I don't know whether it's just that I got used to those performances throughout episode 1, but there was definitely a difference in performances. I think that's what lets this episode down, because of course episode 1's the more atmospheric in the sewers and all that. Of course, the TARDIS lands in 76 Totters Lane, and it just looks completely different from what it did in the 90s, because the signs been made into little sort of like on the wall sign instead of being the big gates as it was in An Earthly Child and Remembrance of the Daleks, but it's just too different and it feels really shoehorned in. But of course this was post 5 Doctors, so of course John Nathan-Turner was trying to get into the oh, let's just do a little bit of a fan wank here, or let's just jerk them off a little bit there. And that's one of the things that sort of let down some episodes in the JNT era, or late JNT era, was that they were clearly shoehorning these things in, and that was an example of one. But of course, Attack of the Cybermen is one that's already embracing the past, because it's essentially a sequel to Tomb of the Cybermen and a prequel to The 10th Planet. And of course, that's clearly Ian Levine's influence. But it's seeing how The 10th Planet was set in 1986, you can really see why they would do that. And at the time, it would have been a wasted opportunity not to. It makes the Doctor, they're trying to make the Dark Doctor come out a bit more, because he allowed Mondas to be destroyed. It's working to these aspects, and it does that quite well. Of course, the reason why it's a sequel to Tomb of the Cybermen is because it's set on Telos, and there's nothing wrong with that. Telos is an interesting planet. I'd like to see more done on Telos. But it's that they got the Cyber Controller. They had him played by David Banks, who played the Cyber Controller in Tomb of the Cybermen. Of course, that was 20 years beforehand. David Banks had put on a little bit of weight. Yeah, we had him the Beast Cyberman. It's like the chest plate was straight, and you can see it like poking up because of his belly. It's yeah, they should have recast that role. So yeah, we've got a morbidly obese Cyberman. It's something that's quite distracting when you see it on screen. So that happened. They also introduced Cyber Scouts, sort of like those black ones who are mute. Yeah, so you had Cyber Scouts. And you also had the Doctor's Sonic Lance. What was that supposed to be like a recurring thing? Because he sort of builds it like, oh yeah, this is my new Sonic Screwdriver, and after it was destroyed in a visitation. And then it literally just gets used to blow up the Cryon thing, Telos base stuff. And, you know, it's sort of served its purpose, hasn't it? Yeah, well, all the Cybermen getting blown up again, that was clearly Eric Saward's not doing, wasn't it? But yeah, this is an underrated story, I would say. It deserves better. It's got that iffy production value and performances in episode 1. Episode 2 is better. But what's significant about episode 1 is that the viewership for it was quite high. Like, because they moved it back to a Saturday slot, and they had 45-minute episodes. I mean, it was actually quite a big thing at the time. And yeah, so people were interested. So episode 1 got a viewership of 8.9 million. Which compared to the previous 2 seasons, having been on Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays or whatever, like the stupidity of that, was actually quite well. The Cybermen aspect of it was clearly people thinking, ooh, Earthshock. It's going to be like Earthshock again, isn't it? Love Earthshock. And they were clearly playing to the post-Earthshock and post-Five Doctors appeal. Episode 2 didn't get 8.9, it went down about a couple of million. So episode 1 clearly hadn't been received that well, but episode 2 I'd say is a superior part to this. Of course, this is also coming just off the tail end of Twin Dilemma, and my god, we all know what happens with the Twin Dilemma. You can see they've toned it down a lot. Like, I think the fact, like, people are like, why did they put a 6th Doctor story at the end of a 5th Doctor season? If they hadn't, imagine the entire of season 22 being the Twin Dilemma. That is hell. I am describing hell. So yeah, it's kind of good they had that break, because it meant that they knew what to change about Colin's Doctor, and well, Colin deserved better. Yeah, this is an interesting one. Basically, it's a bit, it tears you a bit, because yes, it's quite an interesting story, but there's a lot of tropes in it, and there's a lot of aspects where you're like, yeah, and again, the production values and the performances don't really seem to meet. The Cryons were a bit silly. I mean, you can see their eyes through those eye holes. I mean, yeah, the Cryons weren't that great. So yeah, what do I rate this story? Probably like somewhere between a 7 and an 8. I think probably closer to a 7. So yeah, 7 out of 10. Pretty decent, above average. If you haven't seen it recently, go and watch it again. It's actually quite a good watch. But that's all I've really got to say about this one. Next week, probably not next week actually, it's probably going to be quite a while until I can next do one of these, because I'm very busy at the weekends now. I will be doing The Empty Child / The Doctor Dances, 2005 Christopher Ecclestone. And yeah, I'm not going to get this one done very quickly.